We're big fans of the FinOps Foundation at IDC. As a matter of fact, as we go through the presentation today, if you look close enough, you may see a few references to the FinOps Foundation. Also, don't worry about trying to capture every data point as we go through the presentation. You'll be able to download all this content at the end of the virtual summit. Again, my name is Jensen. I'm a research vice president here at IDC, and I cover the intelligent cloud. The intelligent cloud is a market that you use to manage your public or private cloud. And we have a very generous definition of public or private cloud. That also includes the edge. But it's anything to manage, monitor, automate, or optimize your public cloud. Because if you're not optimizing your business and providing value, then you're really not doing a good job and having a competitive advantage. I've actually got 3 FinOps Foundation certifications, and hopefully we can share some best practices on how you can move your FinOps team forward today. Let's first start with the agenda. We've got several opportunities with our budgets for 2026, but also some challenges, as you can imagine, as well. Then we're going to go into the industry and a market overview and just talk about the intelligent cloud and the FinOps market in general. Then the meat of the conversation today will really focus on giving you actual practical advice, real world examples, along with data to back that up on how to mature your FinOps teams, how to adopt AI for FinOps, and then also how to do FinOps for AI. And then a look at the agentic future that we're all hearing so much about these days. Well, let's start with just like an overview of the kind of the top 3 themes that I'm seeing in the market today. First, the hybrid cloud is still king. It's here. It's not going anywhere. We thought maybe it'd start to dwindle, but it's back as strong as ever, especially with AI, and we'll touch on that a little bit further. But only really about 7% of global companies are purely in the public cloud. So the vast majority, 90+%, are in this hybrid mode. And of course, that includes the edge as well. AI, that's the theme for today. We're going to talk about how you can grab the gold. The Olympics have passed us up. They're completed now, but it's still a common theme. And we want to make sure that you don't fall into the same pitfalls that we've had before as people migrate to the cloud. Now you've got AI projects, both on-prem and in the public cloud. We want to make sure we can capture these costs as you move from pilot into production and make sure you hit those ROI targets. And then FinOps maturity. We'll talk about the adoption of FinOps, which is amazing over the last few years, but the maturity level, maybe not quite as amazing. A lot of people are in the lower end of that, and give you some tips on how you can move ahead in your journey to mature your FinOps teams. All right, let's start with the budgets. This is fairly positive news. Over 60% of you told IDC at the end of last year that your budget for this year, 2026, was going to increase. 60%. That's pretty amazing. When we looked at that same stat from a year ago, only 39% told us your budgets were going up for 2025. And it's not just that they're going up. If you see that box over there on the left, the mean increase of your budget from last year to 2026 is over 14%. So a double-digit increase, that's pretty strong. And we want to help you invest that and get the best bang for your buck. And so we ask companies, drilling into that number, what are the areas that you plan to invest in and how can we help you? And we found that, sure enough, AI agents, even though there's a lot of hype in the market, sometimes we worry that the vendors are just trying to push the next shiny object to make more money, increase their sales out there. But this is coming from 1,000 enterprises, not vendors, that told us that, number one, with 45% of their new investment plans were going into agentic AI to really help improve their business processes. And then we're looking at number 2, of course, cybersecurity resilience. That has been in the top 3 for as long as I can remember. So it's always a matter of, is it going to be number 2 or number 3? And that makes sense. It's an ever-changing landscape. You've got to continue to invest in there with your new budgeted monies. And then finally, even though we've been moving to the public cloud for 14, 15 years now, still almost 32% of you are spending money as if one of your top areas is to migrate applications from on-prem to the cloud. So that's a long-term journey for many of us. Now the recession. This poll was actually taken before any of the outbreaks in the Middle East, any of the spike in oil prices, geopolitical problems. Of course, they've been around for a while, but they seem to have gotten increasingly challenging in 2026. 69% of you told us it was either likely or very likely that we would have an encounter recession before the end of this year. So if you're thinking back at my past, sometimes I get a budget, it had an increase in it. but then something would happen either internally or externally to the business, external challenges like we're seeing today with the spike in oil prices and things like that. And you have to give back some of that budget mid-year or in the second half of the year. So we need to be aware. Yes, we've got strong budgets for 2026, but something could happen geopolitically or with a recession, and we may have to give some of that back. So let's optimize our current spend and make sure we get our biggest bang for the buck as possible. So I mentioned the intelligent cloud that I monitor and run for IDC. As you can see, it's a pretty healthy, it's a large market. Again, FinOps is just a subset of this larger market. It includes the automation, the management, the optimization of your public or private cloud. It was over 23 billion in 24. And we just now getting the data for 2025, but we expect that to be over 20% higher. So you're talking about 26, 27 billion when the final numbers for 25 are out. And we project the forecast for the market to grow at a healthy 14% and be at 45 billion by 2029. So people are investing not just into the public cloud, but managing it from a financial standpoint, from a performance, from an optimization standpoint. As you can see, I cover automation, IT service management, and the operations, anything to manage that public cloud or private cloud. So it's a very healthy market, very large market that also includes FinOps. Let's drill down into the FinOps. That's what we're here to talk about. These are the top 7 vendors by market share for 2024. Again, we'll be updating this for the 2025 data shortly. And you can see the top 3 vendors, at least, or actually the top 4 vendors, all had acquisitions in 2024. There are a lot of FinOps vendors, especially when you're talking about the niche or smaller vendors out there. And so you're starting to see acquisitions and mergers pick up in 2024. And of course, this does not include Flexera's recent announcements in 2025. So that will probably move them up into the number 2 or number 1 spot for this coming report because those are not included yet. But lots of acquisitions, and you can see here the top 7 vendors by market share. It's the first time we've reached over $2 billion in just FinOps tools and subscription revenue, and it was up a healthy 21% in actual spend from the prior year. So let's get into your teams and what you're facing. I mentioned the adoption earlier, and it's just really incredible to see an 87, almost 88% adoption of FinOps. I cannot find any reference of FinOps from 2019 or earlier. So, and this data was taken at the end of 2025. So in just 5 years, we went from didn't exist to 88% adoption. I've talked to other people at IDC that have been here longer than I have, 20, 30-year veterans. And whether you're talking about Agile or DevOps, DevSecOps, AI Ops, SREs, all these different processes and concepts that we see in IT, this adoption beats all of those as far as the amount and the speed to get to this near full adoption at 88%. So the average team size is 8, as you can see there. That includes both part-time and full-time practitioners. So a lot of part-time folks in there that have different roles in the company, but to participate in the FinOps meetings and help with the implementation of the recommendations. And then also, I included the typical size of a cloud center of excellence. That's important because, at least at IDC, we see a lot of FinOps teams reporting to the cloud center of excellence. A lot of them are moving to cloud center of enablement, but regardless of what you call it, FinOps teams report to the CIO or one of these CCOEs quite often. So that's a pretty common place. Now we're talking a little bit about the scope of FinOps. So this is important because it's not just about the regular compute network and storage. When we first migrated to the public cloud, trying to optimize that, trying to find the right savings plan, et cetera, for those teams. Expanding the scope is really important for a number of reasons, mainly because SaaS and PaaS, if you combine those two and compare it to that more traditional cloud computing, that spend can be equal or greater to what you're spending in the public cloud for just those more traditional virtual server type of instances. And there's a lot of business value in there. So whether you're talking about your Salesforce or your ITSM, collaboration platforms, all kinds of SaaS tools that are out there. I think there's IDC tracks over 25,000 different SaaS providers. I think there's something in the Wall Street Journal recently about the SaaS apocalypse coming because AI is going to disrupt the SaaS market, but I would not worry about that. The SaaS market is here to stay. There's so much value. It's very sticky. It's providing, benefits like HR, payroll, all these really necessary business capabilities and at a great value. So you're going to see that locked in for a long period. So how do we handle that? How do we surface these costs as a FinOps team? Because the telemetry is totally different. It got different API, a different download. The focus standard is fantastic that the FinOps Foundation promotes for the big hyperscalers, but there's very few SaaS providers that have joined into that so far. So you're kind of having to figure out that telemetry, how to get that data into your tool, into your platforms on its own. And of course, you've got, speaking of platforms, the data management platforms like the Snowflakes, the Databricks, et cetera. Those are often 7-figure spends from enterprises. So big spend in that. How do you control that? That's completely different than managing a seat license in an HR SaaS tool, for example. So we've got to figure all that out, and how can we pull all that into a platform? Because it is important to expand that scope, but then we want to make it visible, and then we want to optimize it, of course, as well, so we get the best return and provide our procurement teams with negotiation tools when those renewals come up as well. So now let's look at our first advice. So we've been talking about the FinOps teams and maturity. Really, standardization is key to this whole concept. We want to come up with a standard way of reporting, benchmark ourselves, at least to start with. How are we doing in the past? How did we do in the future with our forecast? Really coming up with those standards and the metrics that we want to monitor. That's going to be key to moving you from, let's say, pre-crawl. I know some of you are in the crawl, but we've got some real new companies that have just started with FinOps in the last 6 to 12 months, and they're kind of in that pre-crawl stage. Is that concept that I made up? But they need to move into where they are starting to monitor, measure themselves, and then ultimately benchmark themselves against competitors. And at least me personally, I prefer a platform-centric approach where you can pull in all that data. We talked about SaaS being able to pull that into one tool. Again, there's so many tools out there, over 130 FinOps players in the market. You can have 5 or 6 of those, and I have niche for each one of them. But then I worry about the adoption, the integrations, and the ease of use and training when you have that many different capabilities. So a platform approach that covers SaaS, covers PaaS, as well as traditional both on-prem and private cloud spend is essential. And then we want to leverage our budgets. If we do have budgets, do we need to add an AI module, for example, to our FinOps tools? Is that an extra charge? And do we want to add that, and how will we utilize that? Do we need to expand the seat licenses as we grow our FinOps teams? Things like that to leverage these budgets that we have for 2026. And then, as I mentioned, expanding the scope so you have a more comprehensive and transparent reporting process to your business. So we want to provide a real life example of each one of these suggestions and advice. So we'll start with a healthcare provider for this maturing FinOps. They focused on tagging, which is a key concept, especially if we want to move from walk to the run maturity level. And getting that tagging right, and then actually allocating through chargebacks over 90% of your cost. That was their stated goal. They were able to meet that, this healthcare provider, and it really became a strategic partner to the business. Once they had that in place, then they can start dabbling and seeing how unit economics can provide even greater visibility, and really move from just cost optimization into investment strategies, and really be a strategic partner to the business, providing over $1 million in savings after they got to that key threshold of 90%. All right, we're going to move into the next topic, which is FinOps for AI. And we just put out a paper last year on this at IDC, talking about how it is so different, an AI project, when you're trying to manage that, especially figure out the cost and the ROI calculations up front. Hopefully you're getting your FinOps teams involved in those projects and not doing them as one-offs with the line of business owners only, because the costs are so different. And it's not just the GPUs. Everybody's aware of that. You see my number 6 bullet point down there. A lot of people are aware that there's data management and ongoing cost with the data management, the cleansing of that to make AI really work and be reliable for your organization. But there's also things like network infrastructure, low latency storage, things that just a typical ERP or warehouse management project that we've been doing for decades now is totally different than those type of projects. Additional legal reviews, all the governance that you want to put in place. Is it public data? Is it private data? Are we using RAG? All these different concepts that just are not part of a traditional project. So we came up with a list of all of these different elements, but I've highlighted some of the big ones there that we don't want to miss because it is so different. So that makes it really critical to get FinOps teams involved up front. So as you're looking at FinOps for AI, again, applying our normal FinOps concepts to an AI project, Cloud security and cloud AI are the top areas that companies are reporting, again, at the end of 2025 to IDC, that these are areas where they found a lot of underutilized resources. So I want to share that and make sure that you guys are looking at these two areas. There's a lot of pilot AI projects out there. Maybe they were successful, maybe they weren't. And we want to make sure that that we are looking for either discontinued resources, those zombie servers out there, or just something that are maybe over provisioned and scaling those back to save money and provide additional investments elsewhere. If you look at companies, not quite half, but 41% said they found 15% of their AI spend was completely wasted because of some of these issues with the cloud security or cloud AI as part of these projects. And if you're not being involved, you feel like you're being left out, different business owners, executives are doing their own thing, not involving the FinOps team in their AI projects, you're not alone, because only about 7.5% of companies have fully embedded those FinOps into their AI projects. So we need to work on that. There's a big opportunity there to help companies move out of this pilot phase into production and also hit their ROI targets at the same time. Recommendations for FinOps for AI. As I mentioned, it is different in many different ways. I list some of the different tools that the hyperscalers provide there. You actually need to use different tools to look at some of these costs and make sure that's integrated with your FinOps platform to pull in these costs and get this more granular level, different types of API costs, et cetera, web services costs that the different hyperscalers provide. So you've got to educate your teams. Hey, we need to use these free tools like we do in conjunction with our paid FinOps tools, but there's a different amount of data, there's a different approach, different terminology, et cetera. So we really need to invest in training both of our FinOps teams and our line of business owners of these AI projects. And of course, we want to cost optimize those like we always do, but the tagging needs to be different. Again, you can't tag a virtual server the same way that you do a cost from SageMaker or Bedrock or one of these AI services that are out there, all the different SaaS providers that we talked about earlier. So that's going to have a new approach. You may have to adapt or customize your tagging processes and policies as well, because it is more than just optimizing GPUs. There's a lot of different technologies that you need to work out. Finally, tokens, that's another unique charge or that you want to optimize for AI. But if you can get on the front end, we really want you to consider, should I go with these usage-based tokens, or is there another option? Can I go with more of a traditional cloud virtual server, more of a time-based where I'm just signing up for so many compute hours and so much capabilities there and put my models on my own servers? Or do I want to use these token-based and have it hosted like in a web service or a SaaS provider? So we gave some examples of some of the math there, but that's something we want your FinOps teams to consider and move forward with. So moving into a real world example of that. So we'll look at a global insurer. They had, as you can imagine, multiple AI, specifically agent pilots running in parallel. They hadn't gotten their FinOps teams fully involved, but they educated them, brought them into the process, looked at these pilots that were running and said, okay, if we had an ROI, are we meeting it? Some of the projects didn't have ROIs or calculations at all, so let's do those calculations and then prioritize them. And they were able to find $6 million in quick wins where they could say, let's discontinue these lower returns and plow that into the higher return AI agentic use cases and really ultimately save $17 million over the course of a year. So big money bringing in the FinOps teams, helping them to right size not just the GPUs, but other idle resources that may be out there or just low ROI type projects. I always like to talk about people. We've mentioned people a couple of times, the teams, the size of the teams, the capabilities there. I mentioned the FinOps Foundation. This was the first one, the top ranked skill was actually AI cost management. I'd already mentioned that we need to train our teams, invest in our folks. And the FinOps Foundation found that 58% ranked that as the top skill, is just to have a new AI cost management skill for their team members of the FinOps teams. Moving into the IDC data, we found that having a tool that utilized AI and ML under the covers was also important at almost 79%. So a lot of people want to have that in their FinOps platform tool. And then when you look at the AI projects themselves that we just spoke about, lacking those skills impacted 37%. So over a third of the projects were impacted because they didn't have enough AI skills on their teams, whether it be engineering or the FinOps, either one. So let's look at a little bit more survey data. When you're looking at the tools, again, we're talking about the FinOps for AI at this point. 2/3 of the teams found that their current tool did support either AI or ML type capabilities. And almost the same number, 70%, said they'd be willing to pay for that. So if you have a FinOps tool and you want to leverage AI for that tool, then companies are willing to pay for it. And a majority of the tools do have it already. So it's maybe a module you just need to turn on. So we encourage you to look at that. And then again, getting into how do you want to pay for that? Would you rather it be usage-based like tokens or more of a license or seat or hybrid approach? You can see that most people do want to go with that token usage base for their AI or Gen AI when they're talking about their FinOps solution and enabling that that new module. So I mentioned, I'll start over on the right here, the adoption of the cloud is still, after all these years, a decade and a half or so, we've just crossed the 50% threshold. So about 54% have moved into the public cloud, but around 46% are still running production workloads on premise. And this is important because we need that tool, our FinOps tool, to be able to, as I mentioned earlier, if you're not doing SaaS and PaaS as part of your reporting and your optimization, you're missing a big chunk. But if you're not doing your private cloud, you're also missing a big part of the cost of running your organization, running your cloud infrastructure. So we want to capture that. And then looking at where companies are going to invest in the next 12 months, that's over on the left. The public cloud is about very even, 67% versus 70% plan to invest more than 10% into the private cloud versus the public cloud. So we're going to be investing in both clouds in the future. So it's not like all the investments going towards the public cloud. Actually, slightly more companies say they're going to invest more than 10% at least. And I consider 10% a significant investment. That's why we drew the line there into their private cloud. So it's really important to capture that. And AI in your FinOps tool can help you capture both public, multi-cloud, as well as private. So let's talk about the advice for AI for FinOps. You can see we polled companies and said, what are the top 2 strategies you're trying to use to control cost? And they're trying to use AI to manage both their portfolio and the life cycle. So those are great tools to automate your FinOps team and those recommendations. So that's my first bullet as well, is to use your FinOps tool. When you really combine the automation and the AI recommendations that you get out of a tool, to get those into production quicker. I call that smart automation. So you're combining the automation, you're combining those recommendations. You're not letting them sit there for days or weeks after the tool has already generated those. You're either automatically or at least through workflow implementing those in a more automated manner, as opposed to just manually going through your DevOps teams and getting those recommendations in, which could take weeks or months. You're really leaving that money on the table. Forecasting AI in your FinOps tool is great for doing those what-if scenarios, for looking at your seasonality and your trends, and really providing and improving that future forecasting, which is so important to the business these days. And then, of course, you can use actually Gen AI to help break down the silos. So if you've got a lot of business owners out there, maybe they're not the most technically savvy or financially savvy, but they can ask questions. They can customize reports and dashboards using Gen AI and just ask those questions in a natural language and get the reports back that they need to look at their projects and to get their own reporting out of the FinOps tools, as opposed to waiting or you generating it for them. So some real world examples of this. AI for FinOps, we've got an ERP software firm. They had deployed an AI-enabled strategy for their FinOps teams to really automate, essentially the block storage that they had in their cloud, to right size it, to continually monitor that. They put the guardrails in to make sure that they would always have storage. It wouldn't disconnect or shrink it down too far, but it was in an automated fashion, not waiting for those reports to come out or that bill to come out once a month. And that really provided them with a lot more insights. And then they were actually able to increase that and customize and add their own agents for more real-time automation of other issues, and it resulted in a $2.3 million savings by optimizing the storage, and also additional EC2 savings that they saw after they started deploying agents to monitor that as well. So let's talk about our history. Sometimes it's new technology, the way that we as IT teams implemented it, or we were forced to implement it. Maybe in some cases, it didn't turn out the best, to be candid. So we have NT4O boxes. That's when I was first starting out in IT, inheriting, maybe you did as well, hundreds of NT4O boxes, physical boxes. And he said, well, it's got to be a better way. And of course, there was with virtualization in the 2000s. But then we started seeing VMs sprawl, like, zombie VMs. Like, what was this for? Who created this? It was almost too easy, and they would just sit out there and just chew up resources and storage and space. Then the public cloud, we talked about that. 15 years we've been trying to migrate to the public cloud, but then we had somebody that needed data, so they added GCP. Somebody else needed collaboration, they added Azure. Then they wanted a web service, so AWS. Before we knew it, we had 4 or 5 different cloud providers. Maybe we got some through an acquisition, so we had public cloud sprawl. And now what I'm seeing coming, and I'm worried about, is these AI agents and the sprawl and the unmanaged. Like we saw with the public cloud, you had this spike in cost. We had to come up with this whole concept of FinOps to manage this. What are we going to do about AI agents before it gets out of control? So if we drill into the numbers on Agentic AI, you can see there's millions of them already today. But when you think about how many employees there are, how many companies there are, it's still very, very new, very, very small startup so far. But we expect that to increase by 80-fold. So you're going to very quickly get to 1 billion agents by the end of last year, first of 2026. And if you think of that, it's more of like your company. If you're a decent sized Fortune 1000 company, maybe 10,000 employees, you could have 6,700 agents by the end of this year, start of next year. So 6,700 agents is probably well more than the number of virtual servers or even cloud servers that you have today running your organization. What are these servers and agents going to be doing? Well, by 2029, they're going to be doing hundreds of billions of transactions. They're already doing over 100 million today, but by the end of this decade, which is only 3 or 4 years away, we're talking about hundreds of billions of transactions and embedded into the business. So what are we going to do? Do we have standards around protocols? Are we going to let line of business owners start up with shadow IT? What are we going to do about inventory of these agents, et cetera, before these get out of control? So this is a little bit of the advice here, as well as, unfortunately, a real-world example. We're already finding approximately 1.5 million, even though we don't have that many running today. Over 10% are unmonitored today. So who knows what they're doing? Is there security vulnerability? What happens when they go down? Resiliency. How is that going to happen? Because I'm worried that shadow IT is coming back with a vengeance when it comes to these AI agents, and how easy they're going to be to create in the near future, how easy they're going to be able to purchase if you want a standard agent with the swipe of a credit card. And they're going to be embedded in mission critical processes literally in the next overnight, in the coming few weeks or months. And we don't want this to impact your business, especially if you're trying to troubleshoot and repeat the mistakes of the past, where we didn't have a good inventory of our cloud or our virtual servers, and we ended up spending way more money and also having unnecessary downtime. So this is the agent sprawl. I want to stop this. I want to encourage you to adopt this agent-to-agent communication. Find out what the protocol is. Maybe you want to use MCP, but define that protocol. Put in those guardrails, maybe with your legal, with your procurement, to stop some of this shadow IT like we had to do maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And let's do the same thing with AI agents, and make sure we have these standards ahead before we have to go back and retroactively clean that up. We want to make sure that our observability and our management and our monitoring tools can do this, because resiliency of a Java application may be totally different than a very nimble AI agent that can go and talk to other agents. So we need more granular observability and management of these agents, so we know what we're paying for, but we also know how to troubleshoot it if performance is an issue or downtime. And let's just not repeat this movie again. We've seen it before, as I showed on that timeline, and nobody wants to go back there. So let's try and get ahead of this before it overwhelms us. All right, in conclusion, I'll just wrap it up. We talked about the maturity of FinOps teams, how you need to invest in your teams, look for the metrics, the benchmarking, as well as these capabilities to move your teams forward. The FinOps for AI is important, as well as AI for FinOps, as well as let's just really prepare our AI agents and make sure we don't repeat the same mistakes that we had before.